The photograph slipped from behind the heavy gold frame and landed at Naomi Bennett's feet with a whisper that changed everything. She'd been dusting the portrait in Mr. Hayes's private study, the one room in the massive estate where she was rarely allowed. He was away on business, and the head housekeeper had assigned her the task. The feather duster had caught on something, and when she'd carefully lifted the corner of the frame, an old, yellowed photo had fallen out. Naomi bent down, her dark fingers trembling as she picked it up. The image was faded but clear enough. Two children stood in front of a brick building with tall windows. A sign partially visible in the background read St. Hel. The rest was cut off, but Naomi didn't need to see more. She knew that building. She'd lived there for 13 years. The boy in the photo was small, maybe 8 years old, with light brown hair falling into frightened blue eyes. He wore donated clothes that didn't quite fit. Standing next to him was a girl of about 10, her dark skin catching the sunlight, her hand protectively on the boy's shoulder. The girl's eyes held a sadness too deep for her age. Naomi's knees went weak. She stumbled backward until she hit the leather chair behind the massive desk. The photo fell from her hands again as she covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face without permission. That boy. That scared little boy with the too big clothes and the nightmares. The one who used to crawl into her bed in the girls' ward when the thunderstorms came. The one who'd learned to read by practicing with her. The one who'd shared his only birthday cake with her when no one else remembered her special day. Christopher Hayes. Her Christopher. Little Chris who'd been adopted when he was 8 by some wealthy couple from the city. Chris who'd promised to come back for her. Chris who'd held her hands through the chain-link fence as his new parents led him away, tears running down both their faces. "I'll find you, Nomi," he'd said, using the nickname only he was allowed to call her. "When I'm big, I'll come back and we'll be a family. I promise." 25 years. She'd waited 3 years in that orphanage after he left, hoping every visiting day that he'd come back. He never did. At 16, she'd aged out of the system and entered a world that had been harsh and unforgiving. She'd changed her last name when she got married at 19, a mistake that lasted 2 years and left her with nothing but debt. She'd worked every job imaginable just to survive. And now, here she was. In his house. She'd been cleaning his home for 6 months, and he had no idea who she was. Naomi looked around the study with new eyes. The framed degrees from Harvard. The awards for philanthropy. The photos of Christopher Hayes shaking hands with presidents and celebrities. He'd become everything he'd dreamed of in those whispered conversations they'd had as children. He'd escaped the poverty and hopelessness that had seemed like their destiny. And he'd forgotten her completely. The door to the study suddenly opened. Naomi jumped, quickly wiping her eyes and bending to retrieve the photograph. But it was too late. She looked up to find Christopher Hayes standing in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space. His blue eyes, the same ones from the photo but now confident and sure, fixed on her tear-stained face. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice kind but professional. "Mrs. Chen said you were cleaning in here, but I heard." He stopped mid-sentence as Naomi straightened, still clutching the photograph. His eyes moved from her face to the picture in her hands, then back to her face. Something flickered in his expression. Confusion, maybe. Or recognition that hadn't quite formed into understanding. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes," Naomi managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I found this behind your portrait. It must have slipped down. I didn't mean to. I should go." She tried to move past him, but he stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "Wait," he said softly. "May I see that? Have you ever wondered what would happen if you met the one person who promised never to leave you, but didn't recognize you after all these years? Would you reveal yourself, or would you stay silent? Drop a comment below and let me know what you'd do. And please, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in Naomi's story." 25 years earlier, St. Helena's Orphanage sat on the edge of the city like a forgotten promise. The brick building housed 63 children, all waiting for families that might never come. Naomi Jackson had arrived at St. Helena's when she was 3, after her mother died and no relatives could be found. By the time she was 10, she'd learned all the rules of survival. Keep your head down. Don't get attached. Don't hope too much. Hope hurt worse than hunger. Christopher Miller came to St. Helena's on a rainy Tuesday in October. He was 7 years old, skinny and pale, with bruises on his arms that the intake workers pretended not to see. His father had died, and his mother had disappeared into addiction, leaving Christopher to be found alone in their apartment 3 days later. For the first week, Christopher didn't speak. He sat in the corner of the common room, knees pulled to his chest, watching everything with those wide, frightened eyes. The other kids ignored him. New kids either toughed up or they didn't make it. But Naomi noticed him. She always noticed the scared ones. "You should eat," she said one evening, sitting down next to him in the cafeteria. He hadn't touched his dinner, a watery stew and stale bread. "I know it looks bad, but you'll feel worse if you don't." Christopher looked at her, then at the food, then back at her. Slowly, he picked up his spoon. "I'm Naomi," she continued, taking a bite of her own dinner. "I've been here a long time. If you need help with anything, you can ask me." He nodded but didn't speak. It became their routine. Naomi would sit with Christopher at meals, walk with him to the small classroom where volunteers taught them basic reading and math, and make sure the older boys didn't bother him. She never asked him questions or pushed him to talk. She just existed beside him, solid and reliable in a world that was neither. It was 3 weeks before he spoke to her. They were in the library, a small room with donated books and mismatched furniture. Naomi was reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, a book she'd read so many times she could recite pages from memory. Christopher sat beside her, following along with the pictures. "My dad used to read to me," Christopher whispered suddenly. His voice was hoarse from disuse. "Before he got sick." Naomi looked at him, careful not to make a big deal of this moment. "What was your favorite story?" "Where the Wild Things Are." A small smile crossed his face, there and gone. He'd make monster sounds. "I don't know that one," Naomi admitted. "I could tell it to you," Christopher offered. "If you want. I remember most of it." And so began their real friendship. Christopher came out of his shell slowly, like a flower opening after a long winter. He started eating better. He laughed at Naomi's jokes. He joined in the games at recess, though he always stayed close to her. At night, when thunderstorms rolled through the city, Christopher would slip out of the boys' ward and creep down the hallway to the girls' side. He'd tap on the door 3 times, and Naomi would let him in. She'd give up half her thin blanket, and they'd huddle together in her narrow bed, whispering in the dark. "Do you think anyone will want us?" Christopher asked one night. He was 8 now, and adoption had become something they talked about in hypotheticals, like discussing unicorns or dragons. "Maybe," Naomi said. She was 11 and old enough to know that older kids rarely got chosen. "If they do, we could ask to be adopted together. Like a package deal." "I'd like that," Christopher said. "We could be brother and sister." "We already are," Naomi told him, squeezing his hand under the blanket. "We don't need papers for that." But the universe had different plans. 2 months later, a couple came to St. Helena's. Margaret and Robert Hayes had been trying to have children for years. They'd finally decided to adopt and wanted a young boy, one who could grow up as their own. They chose Christopher. The week before he left was the worst of Naomi's life. Christopher cried every night, refusing to go. He begged his new parents to take Naomi too, but they only wanted one child. The orphanage director told Christopher how lucky he was, how he should be grateful. But all Christopher could see was that he was leaving his sister behind. The day they came to pick him up, Naomi walked him out to the chain-link fence that surrounded the orphanage courtyard. Christopher's new parents waited by their expensive car, patient but clearly ready to leave. "Don't forget me," Christopher said, gripping Naomi's hands through the fence. Tears ran down his face. "Please don't forget me, Naomi." "I could never forget you," Naomi promised, though her heart was breaking. "You're going to have a good life now. A real family." "You're my real family," Christopher insisted. "I'll find you, Naomi. When I'm big, I'll come back and we'll be a family. I promise. I promise." They hugged through the fence until his new mother called his name. Christopher walked backward toward the car, his eyes never leaving Naomi's face. She waved until the car disappeared around the corner. Then she went inside, climbed into her bed, and didn't come out for 2 days. Naomi Bennett, formerly Naomi Jackson, formerly Naomi Miller during her brief, disastrous marriage, handed Christopher the photograph and stepped back. She watched his face as he studied the image, saw the moment recognition hit. But it wasn't recognition of her. It was recognition of himself as that scared little boy, frozen in time. "St. Helena's," he said softly, running his thumb over the faded image. "I haven't seen a picture from therein." He looked up at her. "How did this get behind my portrait?" "I don't know, Mr. Hayes," Naomi said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "It must have been there for a while." He studied the photograph more closely, squinting at the girl standing next to his younger self. "I wonder who she was," he murmured. "She looks familiar somehow." Naomi's heart clenched. "Children often look similar in old photos," she managed. "The lighting, the quality." "Maybe," Christopher agreed, but he kept staring at the image. "I don't remember much from back then. My parents, my adoptive parents, they thought it was better if I didn't dwell on that time. They even changed my last name legally. Miller to Hayes. So he'd been Christopher Miller. Now Christopher Hayes. And she was no longer Naomi Jackson but Naomi Bennett. No wonder they hadn't connected the dots when she'd applied for the housekeeping position 6 months ago. She'd known exactly who he was when she submitted her application. 3 weeks earlier, she'd been working the night shift at a diner, serving coffee to drunk college students and business people having affairs. She'd looked up at the television mounted in the corner and seen him. Christopher Hayes, tech billionaire, announcing a new initiative to improve conditions in foster care and orphanages. Her hands had shaken so hard she'd dropped a tray of dishes. She'd gone home that night and searched everything about him online. Harvard graduate. Self-made billionaire at 30 after selling his first company. Now 33, he ran a tech empire worth billions. He lived in a mansion on the outskirts of the city. He was single, devoted to his work and his various charities. And he was hiring household staff. Naomi had stared at the job posting for 2 days before applying. She told herself she just wanted to see him once, to know that he'd had a good life. She'd never planned to tell him who she was. What would be the point? He was a billionaire, and she was a woman drowning in debt from her dead sister's medical bills, working 3 jobs just to keep her head above water. But she'd taken the job anyway. Some part of her, the part that was still that 10-year-old girl, needed to know he was okay. For 6 months, she'd cleaned his house, washed his dishes, and never said a word. Christopher Hayes was kind to his staff, generous with time off and fair with wages. He said please and thank you. He remembered birthdays. He was a good man, and that knowledge had been enough for Naomi. Until this photograph had fallen from behind the portrait, and all those carefully constructed walls had come crashing down. "You can keep it, if you'd like," Naomi said, nodding toward the photo. "I should finish cleaning." "Wait," Christopher said again. He looked at her more closely now, and Naomi forced herself to meet his gaze. "Have we met before? Outside of your employment here, I mean?" "I don't think so, Mr. Hayes." "You can call me Christopher," he said absently, still studying her face. "You just seem familiar. But maybe I'm just remembering the past." Naomi finished for him. He smiled at that, a real smile that reminded her so much of the boy he'd been. "Maybe. Thank you for finding this. It means more than you know." Naomi nodded and left the study as quickly as she could without running. She made it to the staff bathroom before the tears came again. She sat on the closed toilet seat and cried silently, her hand over her mouth to keep from making noise. She'd made a mistake taking this job. She'd thought she could handle seeing him, being near him, knowing he was happy and successful. But she couldn't. It hurt too much to be this close yet completely invisible to him. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a text from the collection agency. Another payment on her sister's medical bills was overdue. Tamara had died 8 months ago, leaving Naomi with $47,000 in debt from the cancer treatments that hadn't worked. Naomi wiped her eyes and stood up. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. She had bills to pay and a life to survive. Christopher Hayes had moved on from St. Helena's, built an empire, and forgotten the scared little boy who'd needed a big sister. And she had to accept that. She had to let him go, just like she should have done 25 years ago. But as she walked back through the mansion's marble hallways, she couldn't help wondering what would have happened if she'd told him the truth. If she'd looked him in the eye and said, "It's me, Chris. It's Naomi." Maybe someday she'd find the courage. But not today. Today, she had floors to mop and dishes to wash and a life that didn't include miracles. What would you do in Naomi's position? Would you keep hoping that Christopher remembers you, or would you finally tell him the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed because the moment of truth is coming, and you won't want to miss it. 3 weeks passed after the photograph incident. Naomi managed to avoid being alone with Christopher by swapping shifts with other staff members whenever he was home. It wasn't hard. Christopher worked constantly, often staying at his downtown office until late at night. When he was at the mansion, he was usually in his private rooms or entertaining business associates. But then came the charity gala. Christopher hosted an annual fundraiser at his estate to benefit foster children and orphanages. This year's event was the biggest yet, with over 200 guests expected. All available staff were required to work, serving food, checking coats, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Naomi had no choice but to be there. She wore the standard staff uniform, black pants, white button-up shirt, and a black vest. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. She was assigned to work the coats in the grand foyer, taking wraps and furs from wealthy guests who barely looked at her. The mansion had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers sparkled. A string quartet played in the ballroom. The smell of expensive catering filled the air. Men in tuxedos and women in gowns worth more than Naomi made in a year swept past her, laughing and sipping champagne. Christopher stood near the main staircase, shaking hands and greeting guests. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost as much as a used car. His hair was styled, his smile was practiced, and he looked every inch the successful billionaire. Naomi felt a pang in her chest. This wasn't her Christopher. Her Christopher had shared stale bread and watery soup. Her Christopher had been afraid of thunderstorms. Her Christopher had promised to come back. But that Christopher was gone. This man was a stranger in her Christopher's body. "Coat, please," a woman in a fur stole said impatiently, holding the garment out without looking at Naomi. "Of course," Naomi replied, taking the coat and hanging it carefully on the rack. She attached a numbered tag and handed the matching ticket to the woman. The evening wore on. Naomi's feet ached in her sensible shoes. Her face hurt from maintaining a pleasant expression. But she did her job efficiently and quietly, becoming invisible in the way service workers learn to be. Around 10 o'clock, she was given permission to take a 15-minute break. Most of the guests had arrived, and the coat check had slowed. Naomi slipped out a side door into one of the mansion's smaller sitting rooms, a place where staff sometimes rested between tasks. She sank into a chair by the window and closed her eyes. Soft music drifted from the ballroom. She could hear laughter and conversation, the sounds of people who'd never known what it meant to be truly hungry or truly alone. Without thinking, Naomi began to hum. It was an old lullaby, one she'd learned at St. Helena's from one of the older girls. She used to sing it to Christopher when he couldn't sleep, her voice low and soothing in the darkness of the orphanage. "Hush now, baby, don't you cry. Mama's gonna sing you a lullaby. I know that song." Naomi's eyes flew open. Christopher stood in the doorway of the sitting room, his expression strange and distant. He looked like a man waking from a dream. "Mr. Hayes," Naomi said, starting to stand. "I'm sorry, I was just taking a break. I'll get back to." "No, wait." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "That song. How do you know it?" Naomi's heart pounded. I'm not sure. I must have heard it somewhere." "It's from St. Helena's," Christopher said slowly. "One of the older girls used to sing it. I remember now. He paused, his eyes focusing on Naomi with sudden intensity. "She used to sing it to a boy who was afraid of storms." The room felt too small suddenly. Naomi couldn't breathe. "Mr. Hayes, I really should get back to work. How did you know that song? Christopher asked again, his voice gentle but insistent. Please. I need to understand. Naomi looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the boy she'd known peeking through the man's face. His eyes held the same expression they'd had when he'd asked her questions in the dark, when he'd needed reassurance that the world wasn't as scary as it seemed. I learned it at St. Helena's, she whispered. A long time ago. Christopher went very still. You were there. It wasn't a question, but Naomi nodded anyway. When? He asked, moving closer. I was there for 13 years. From age 3 to 16. When were you there? He asked more urgently. I left in 2000, Naomi said. I aged out. Christopher did the math in his head. I was there until 1997. I was 8 when I left. He stared at her, and she could see the memories clicking into place. The photograph. The girl in the photograph. That was you. Naomi felt tears starting to form, but she blinked them back. Yes. Oh my God. Christopher sank into the chair across from her, his face pale. Nomi. You're Nomi. Hearing that name, the one only he'd called her, broke something inside Naomi. The tears fell despite her best efforts to stop them. Yes, she whispered. I'm Nomi. I'm Naomi. But how, why didn't you? Christopher ran his hands through his hair, destroying its perfect styling. You've been working here for months. You've been in my house, and you never said anything. Why? Because you're Christopher Hayes, and I'm the maid, Naomi said simply. Because 25 years passed, and you forgot about me. Because I'm nobody, and you're. Don't say that, Christopher cut her off sharply. Don't you dare say that. You were never nobody. You were. His voice broke. You were everything to me. They sat in silence, the weight of 25 years of separation heavy between them. The music from the ballroom seemed distant now, like it was coming from another world entirely. I looked for you, Christopher said finally. When I turned 18, I went back to St. Helena's. But they said you'd left 2 years earlier. They couldn't tell me where you'd gone. I hired investigators, but Naomi Jackson had disappeared. You changed your name. I got married young, Naomi explained. It didn't work out. I took my ex-husband's name for a while, then changed it to Bennett when I went back to school for my GED. I wanted a fresh start. I never stopped looking, Christopher said. For years, I looked. I donated money to St. Helena's, got involved in foster care reform, hoping somehow I'd find you. I thought if I could just see you once, tell you I was sorry for not coming back like I promised. You were 8 years old, Naomi said gently. You couldn't have come back. You were a child. But I should have found a way. I should have kept my promise. You did, Naomi said, and now she was smiling through her tears. Look at you. Look at what you've become. You're helping children like we were. You're keeping your promise to that scared little boy every single day. Christopher stood up and crossed the space between them. He knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. His eyes were wet too. I'm so sorry, Nomi. I'm so sorry I forgot your face. I'm so sorry it took me this long to recognize you. I'm so sorry for every day you spent thinking I didn't care. I never thought you didn't care, Naomi said. I thought you moved on. I thought you forgot. But I never doubted that you cared back then. I never forgot you, Christopher said fiercely. I forgot what you looked like, but I never forgot you. You saved me, Nomi. You were the only good thing in that place. You taught me that love could exist even in darkness. Naomi squeezed his hands. You saved me too, Chris. You gave me someone to take care of. You gave me a purpose. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people who'd been lost finding their way back to each other across the years. Finally, Christopher stood, pulling Naomi to her feet. Come on, he said. Where? You're done working for tonight. I need to talk to you, really talk to you, and I can't do that while you're wearing a staff uniform at my party. But I can't just leave. Naomi, Christopher said, and his voice held a note of command she'd never heard before. Please. 25 years is long enough. Don't make me wait another minute. And because Naomi had promised herself she'd accept help when it was offered, she nodded. Okay. They left the sitting room together, walking through the back hallways of the mansion. Christopher led her to his private office, a different space than the study where she'd found the photograph. This room was comfortable, lived in, with books on shelves and papers on the desk. He gestured for her to sit on the couch, then sat beside her. Tell me everything, he said. Tell me about the last 25 years. I need to know. And for the first time since they'd parted at that chain-link fence, Naomi did. She told him about aging out of St. Helena's with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes. About her terrible marriage at 19 to a man who'd seemed kind but turned controlling. About working her way through community college while waitressing at night. About her sister Tamara getting sick, and the mountains of medical debt, and losing her anyway. Christopher listened to every word, his hand finding hers halfway through and not letting go. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to help you, he said finally. Chris, you don't have to. I'm going to help you, he repeated firmly. And you're going to let me, because that's what family does. You said we were family that night, before I left. Did you mean it? Of course I meant it. Then let me help you, Christopher said. Please, Naomi. Let me finally keep my promise. Naomi looked into his eyes, saw the determination there, and nodded. Okay, she whispered. Okay. The morning after the gala, Naomi woke up in the staff quarters feeling like the previous night had been a dream. But when she checked her phone, there was a text from an unknown number. It's Christopher. I got your number from HR. Please come to my office at 9 a.m. We need to talk about your situation. And Naomi, don't even think about refusing. Naomi smiled at the screen. That was very much like the little boy she'd known, stubborn and determined when he'd made up his mind about something. At 8:45, she showered and dressed in clean jeans and a simple sweater. She was off duty today anyway, having worked the gala. She made her way through the mansion to Christopher's private office, her heart beating fast with nervousness and anticipation. Christopher was already there, sitting at his desk with papers spread in front of him. He looked up when she entered, and his face broke into a smile that made him look years younger. Naomi, he said, standing up. Thank you for coming. Please, sit down. Naomi sat in one of the comfortable chairs facing his desk. Chris, about last night. I don't want you to feel obligated to. Stop, he interrupted gently. I'm going to help you, and we're not going to argue about it. I've already called my lawyer and my financial advisor. They're working on everything now. Everything? Naomi asked weakly. Christopher picked up a paper from his desk. You told me last night that you owe $47,000 in medical debt from your sister's treatments. That debt is going to be paid off in full by end of business today. Chris, that's too much. It's nothing, he said firmly. It's the interest my money earns in about 2 weeks. Please don't insult me by refusing. Naomi opened her mouth to argue, then remembered the instructions she'd been given. Accept help with gratitude. Don't refuse. She took a breath and nodded. Thank you, she said quietly. That debt has been crushing me for months. I can't tell you what it means to have it gone. That's just the beginning, Christopher continued. You mentioned you were taking online classes, trying to finish your bachelor's degree. I'm paying for the rest of your education, at whatever school you want to attend. If you want to quit the housekeeping job and go to school full-time, you can. Chris. Let me finish, he said. I've had the guest house on the property prepared for you. It's been empty for years. It's yours for as long as you want it, rent-free. It's fully furnished, and you'll have complete privacy. You can move in today if you'd like. Naomi felt tears starting to form. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Christopher told her. Say you'll accept this help. Say you'll let me finally do what I should have done years ago. But you were a child, Naomi protested. You couldn't have done anything. I'm not a child anymore, Christopher said. I have resources now. I have money and power and connections. And I want to use all of it to make sure you have the life you deserve. The life you should have had all along. Naomi wiped her eyes. When you put it like that. Is there any other way to put it? Christopher asked with a small smile. Naomi laughed despite her tears. No, I guess not. Okay. Yes. I accept. And thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Christopher came around the desk and pulled her into a hug. It was the first time they'd embraced since they were children, and for a moment, Naomi was transported back to St. Helena's, to the girl and boy who'd held each other when the world felt too big and scary. You're welcome, Christopher said into her hair. But Naomi, I need you to understand something. This isn't charity. This isn't me being generous. This is me paying a debt that's 25 years overdue. You saved my life when we were kids. You made that place bearable. Without you, I don't know who I would have become. You would have been fine, Naomi said. Maybe, Christopher agreed, pulling back to look at her. But I wouldn't have been me. And I like who I am, mostly because of the foundation you gave me. So please, accept this help not as charity but as payment for services already rendered. Naomi smiled through her tears. You always did know how to argue. Learned from the best, Christopher said. You never let me get away with feeling sorry for myself. They spent the rest of the morning talking. Christopher called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the day. They had lunch brought in, and they talked about everything. The years they'd missed. The people they'd become. The dreams they still had. By evening, Naomi's medical debt had been paid in full. She had a check for her first semester's tuition at the state university. She had keys to the guest house. And most importantly, she had her little brother back. Christopher walked her over to the guest house as the sun was setting. It was a beautiful 2-bedroom cottage with a full kitchen, comfortable furniture, and a little porch overlooking the gardens. It's too much, Naomi whispered, looking around at the space that was now hers. It's not nearly enough, Christopher replied. But it's a start. Make yourself at home, Naomi. This is your place now. And tomorrow, we'll start figuring out everything else. Everything else? Your career. Your future. Whatever you want to do, we'll make it happen, Christopher said. I'm not going to lose you again. We have 25 years to make up for, and I plan to start immediately. Naomi hugged him again. I still can't believe this is real. Believe it, Christopher said. You're stuck with me now. For better or worse, you've got family again. After he left, Naomi walked through the guest house, running her hands over the furniture, looking at the stocked kitchen, standing on the porch in the cool evening air. For the first time in years, maybe for the first time in her entire life, she felt safe. The debt that had been crushing her was gone. She had a place to live that was truly hers. She could finish her degree without working 3 jobs. And most importantly, she had Christopher back. Her little brother who'd become a man she was proud to know. She went to bed that night in the most comfortable bed she'd ever slept in a home that was hers, with hope for the future blooming in her chest like a flower after rain. The scared little girl from St. Helena's was finally allowed to rest. The next 3 months passed like a beautiful dream Naomi was afraid to wake from. She moved fully into the guest house, personalizing it with plants and books and little touches that made it feel like home. She enrolled at the state university as a full-time student, majoring in social work. If she was going to have a fresh start, she wanted to help other kids like she and Christopher had been. Christopher was thrilled when she told him her chosen major. He introduced her to the board of his charitable foundation and arranged for her to do internships at various foster care organizations. He wanted her to have every advantage, every opportunity to succeed. But the best part was simply having him back in her life. They fell into an easy routine. Naomi would study during the day while Christopher worked. In the evenings, they'd have dinner together in the main house, either in the formal dining room or, more often, in the cozy kitchen where they could talk without the weight of all that grandeur. They talked about everything. Christopher told her about building his first company in his college dorm room, about the early days when he'd lived on ramen and coffee, coding 18 hours a day. He told her about the moment his company had sold, making him wealthy beyond anything he'd imagined. He told her about the loneliness that came with success, the difficulty of knowing who genuinely cared about him versus who cared about his money. Naomi told him about her failed marriage, About how she'd thought love meant accepting someone's control until she'd realized she was losing herself. She told him about going back to school at 28, sitting in classes with kids 10 years younger and feeling ancient. She told him about her sister Tamara, about the fierce love between them and the guilt she still carried about not being able to save her. "You couldn't have saved her," Christopher said one night after Naomi had shared a particularly painful memory. They were sitting on the porch of the guest house, watching the stars come out. "Cancer doesn't care how much love there is." "I know that in my head," Naomi said. "But my heart still thinks I should have done more." "Guilt is a terrible companion," Christopher said. "Trust me, I know. I spent years feeling guilty about leaving you at St. Helena's, even though I had no choice. Even though I was 8 years old." "You finally let that go?" Naomi asked. "I'm working on it," Christopher admitted. "Having you here helps. Knowing you're okay, that you don't hate me for leaving." "I could never hate you," Naomi said. "You were the best thing about that place." "You were the best thing about my entire childhood," Christopher replied. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who've known each other's worst moments and stayed anyway. "Can I ask you something?" Christopher said after a while. "Of course. Why did you apply for the housekeeping job? You said you knew it was me. Why not just reach out directly?" Naomi had been expecting this question. "Honestly, I was scared. You'd become this successful, important person. I was broke and drowning in debt. I thought if I reached out, you'd think I was looking for a handout. Or worse, that you wouldn't remember me at all. So you decided to clean my house instead?" Christopher asked with gentle amusement. "I just wanted to see you once," Naomi admitted. "I wanted to know you were okay. That the adoption had worked out. That you'd had a good life. I never planned to tell you who I was. I thought seeing you would be enough. But it wasn't," Christopher said. "No," Naomi agreed. "It wasn't. Every day I worked there, not telling you, it hurt more. But I didn't know how to bridge that gap. You were Mr. Hayes, the billionaire. I was just the help." "You were never just anything," Christopher said firmly. "And I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me right away." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Christopher said. "We found each other. That's what matters. And now we get to figure out what comes next." What came next was better than Naomi could have imagined. Her classes were challenging but fulfilling. She loved learning about child psychology, family systems, trauma-informed care. She wanted to be the kind of social worker who actually helped kids, who saw them as individuals rather than case numbers. Christopher supported her completely. He helped her study for exams, listened to her practice presentations, celebrated her successes. He took a genuine interest in her education and her future career. But he also made sure she had fun. He took her to concerts and plays. He taught her to play tennis on his private court, laughing when she accidentally hit the ball into the garden 3 times in a row. He introduced her to his small circle of real friends, the people who'd known him before the money. Naomi met Richard Turner, Christopher's business partner and best friend. Richard was cautious at first, protective of Christopher. But when he heard the story of St. Helena's, his expression softened. "He looked for you for years," Richard told Naomi one evening when Christopher was out of the room. "I've known Chris for 15 years, and he never stopped searching. Every time we'd be in a new city, he'd check the local orphanage records. He hired investigators. He put up messages on adoption reunion sites. Finding you was his obsession." "I wish I'd known," Naomi said. "Well, you know now," Richard said. "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you're here. I haven't seen him this happy in years." Naomi was happy too. Happier than she'd been since before Tamara got sick. Maybe happier than she'd ever been. She had a home, a purpose, and family. The 3 things that had always felt just out of reach were suddenly hers. She tried not to think too hard about the other feelings that were starting to develop. The way her heart sped up when Christopher smiled at her. The way she looked forward to their dinners together. The way she caught herself studying his face, learning the new lines and angles that time had added. He was still her little brother Chris, the boy she'd protected and cared for. But he was also Christopher Hayes, a man who was intelligent and kind and funny and handsome. And sometimes, when he looked at her a certain way, she wondered if he felt it too. But she pushed those thoughts away. She couldn't risk the relationship they'd just rebuilt. Some things were more important than romantic feelings. Still, on quiet nights in her guest house, Naomi sometimes let herself imagine what it would be like if things were different. If they'd met as adults without the complicated history. If she could let herself feel what she was starting to feel without guilt or fear. But imagination was safe. Reality was more complicated. For now, she was content with having him in her life in any capacity. Everything else could wait. It was a Tuesday evening in early spring when everything shifted. Naomi had been living in the guest house for 4 months. She'd completed her first semester of university with a 4.0 GPA, something that made Christopher ridiculously proud. He'd insisted on taking her out to celebrate. They'd gone to an upscale Italian restaurant downtown. Naomi wore a dress Christopher had bought her for her birthday last month, a simple navy blue sheath that made her feel elegant. Christopher wore dark jeans and a button-up shirt, casual but still somehow looking like money. The dinner was wonderful. They shared pasta and wine and tiramisu. They talked about Naomi's classes for next semester, about Christopher's latest business venture, about a documentary they'd both watched about foster care reform. It was comfortable and easy, the way all their time together had become. But there was something different tonight. A tension in the air that Naomi couldn't quite name. As they drove home in Christopher's car, she realized what it was. This felt like a date. Not dinner between old friends or siblings. An actual date. "Thank you for tonight," Naomi said as they pulled into the long driveway leading to the mansion. "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to," Christopher said. "You worked hard. You deserve to celebrate." He parked the car but didn't immediately get out. They sat in the darkness, the only light coming from the dashboard and the distant glow of the house. "Naomi," Christopher said slowly, "can I ask you something?" "Always." "How do you see me?" he asked. "I mean, when you think about us, about our relationship, what am I to you?" Naomi's breath caught. This was dangerous territory. "You're my family," she said carefully. "You're the little boy I took care of. You're my brother in every way that matters." "That's what I thought," Christopher said, but his voice held disappointment. "That's what I've been telling myself for months. Chris. But the thing is," he continued, "I don't feel like your brother. I haven't since that night of the gala when I realized who you were. And I don't think you feel like my sister either, not really." Naomi's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" Christopher turned in his seat to face her. "I'm saying that every time I look at you, I see the most beautiful, strongest, most incredible woman I've ever met. I'm saying that having dinner with you is the best part of my day. I'm saying that I think about you constantly, in ways that are definitely not brotherly." "We can't," Naomi whispered. "Chris, we grew up together. You called me your sister. People will think." "I don't care what people think," Christopher said. "We're not actually related. We found each other when we were scared kids, and we formed a bond. But that bond doesn't have to define what we are now. We get to choose what we want to be." "What do you want to be?" Naomi asked, her voice barely audible. "I want to be someone you might consider dating," Christopher said. "I want to take you to dinner and have it actually be a date. I want to hold your hand without worrying it's weird. I want." He paused. "I want to see if there's something here, Naomi. Something beyond what we were." Naomi closed her eyes. She'd been pushing these feelings down for months, telling herself they were wrong, that she was confused. But hearing Christopher voice them made them real in a way she couldn't ignore. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if we try this and it ruins everything? What if I lose you again? What if we don't try and we miss out on something incredible?" Christopher countered. "I've already lost you once, Naomi. I spent 25 years wishing I could find you again. Now that I have, I don't want to waste time being afraid. But I work for you. I live in your guest house. The power dynamic." "You don't work for me anymore," Christopher interrupted. "I had HR process your resignation last month. You're a full-time student now. And the guest house is yours regardless of what happens between us. You have complete autonomy, know me. This isn't me as your employer or benefactor asking. This is me, just Chris, asking if you'd be willing to give us a chance. Naomi opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. The earnest expression on his face. The vulnerability in his eyes. The hope mixed with fear. One date, she heard herself say. A real date. And we take it slow. We figure out who we are as adults before we make any big decisions. Christopher's face broke into a smile so bright it made her breath catch. One date. Slow. I can do that. When? This weekend? Naomi suggested. Saturday. Saturday, Christopher agreed. He reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. The gesture felt natural and right. Thank you for taking a chance on me. You took a chance on me first, Naomi said. Back at St. Helena's. You let me in when you wouldn't talk to anyone else. Best decision I ever made, Christopher said. They sat there for another moment, hands linked, before finally getting out of the car. Christopher walked Naomi to the guest house, and at her door, he hesitated. Can I kiss you? He asked. Or is that too fast? Naomi's heart raced. One kiss. To see if. She didn't finish the sentence because Christopher's lips were on hers, soft and gentle and questioning. Naomi kissed him back, her hand coming up to cup his cheek. It lasted only a moment, but when they pulled apart, everything had changed. Good night, Naomi, Christopher said softly. Good night, Chris. Naomi went inside and leaned against the closed door, her fingers touching her lips. She was terrified and excited and confused and hopeful all at once. She'd just agreed to date her childhood best friend. The boy she'd protected and cared for. The man who'd saved her from a life of crushing debt and hopelessness. It should feel wrong. But somehow, it felt like the most right thing in the world. Are you rooting for Naomi and Christopher? Do you think they're making the right choice to explore their feelings? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because their first real date is coming, and you won't want to miss how it unfolds. Saturday arrived with perfect weather. Clear skies, warm sun, a gentle breeze that carried the scent of spring flowers. Naomi stood in front of her closet, trying to decide what to wear for a date with Christopher. It felt strange to call it a date. They'd eaten together countless times over the past months. But this was different. This was official. This was them acknowledging that something had shifted between them. She finally settled on a simple sundress, yellow with tiny white flowers. It was cheerful and casual and made her feel pretty without trying too hard. She left her hair down in natural curls and kept her makeup light. Christopher picked her up at the guest house at 11. He wore jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and when he saw her, his smile made her stomach flip. You look beautiful, he said. You look good too, Naomi replied, suddenly shy. They decided to spend the day at a local park that had botanical gardens, walking trails, and a small lake. It was public enough to feel safe but private enough to talk without worrying about being overheard. The day was perfect. They walked through the gardens, looking at flowers and reading the little signs that explained each species. They had a picnic lunch by the lake, spreading a blanket on the grass and sharing sandwiches and fruit. They rented a paddle boat and spent an hour on the water, laughing when they couldn't coordinate their pedaling and ended up going in circles. It felt easy and natural, like everything with Christopher always had. But there was also an undercurrent of awareness, a new dimension to their relationship. The way he'd take her hand as they walked. The way she'd catch him looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The casual touches that now carried meaning. I've been thinking, Christopher said as they sat by the lake in the late afternoon, watching the sun start its descent. About how to handle this. Us. People are going to talk. I know, Naomi said. The billionaire and his former maid. It's going to look like a cliché. I don't care about that, Christopher said. But I want to make sure you're protected. The media can be cruel, and I don't want you to face that scrutiny if you're not ready. So what do you suggest? We keep it private for now, Christopher said. Not secret, but private. We tell the people who matter. Richard, your friends from school. But we don't make any public announcements. We just be together and see where it goes. That sounds reasonable, Naomi agreed. They stayed at the park until sunset, talking about everything and nothing. When Christopher drove her home, he walked her to her door and kissed her goodnight, a longer kiss this time, one that made her knees weak. Same time next weekend, he asked against her lips. Definitely, Naomi breathed. Over the next several weeks, they fell into a pattern. Dates on weekends, dinners together during the week, stolen kisses when no one was looking. Naomi felt like a teenager experiencing her first romance, giddy and scared and hopeful all at once. But not everyone was happy about this development. Richard Turner had been Christopher's business partner for over a decade. He'd been there through the early struggles, the explosive success, and everything in between. He was protective of Christopher in a way that went beyond business partnership into genuine friendship. And Naomi made him nervous. I'm not saying she's a bad person, Richard said to Christopher one afternoon in Christopher's office at the company headquarters downtown. Naomi was at school, unaware of this conversation. I'm just saying the timing is convenient. What's that supposed to mean? Christopher asked, his voice cooling. She shows up out of nowhere, works as your maid for 6 months, then suddenly reveals she's your childhood friend from the orphanage, Richard said. And now you're dating her. Chris, you can't see how this looks. It looks like I found someone I lost 25 years ago, Christopher said flatly. It looks like I'm happy for the first time in years. Or it looks like someone who knows your soft spot for orphanages and foster kids found a way to exploit that, Richard countered. Have you done any kind of background check on her? Any verification of her story? She's not lying about St. Helena's, Christopher said. I have the records. We were there at the same time. The photograph proves it. The photograph proves a little girl was nice to you when you were 8, Richard said. It doesn't prove this woman is the same person. It doesn't prove she didn't research you extensively and create an entire backstory to get close to you. That's ridiculous, Christopher said, but a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. Not doubt about Naomi's identity, but doubt about her intentions. Is it? Richard pressed. You told me she applied for the housekeeping job knowing who you were. She admitted that. She came to work for you intentionally. How long was she planning to wait before accidentally revealing her identity? She wasn't going to reveal it, Christopher said. I recognized the song she was humming. I put it together. Or she manipulated the situation to make you think you figured it out, Richard suggested. Chris, I know you want to believe the best in people. It's one of the things I admire about you. But you're also a billionaire, and that makes you a target. I've seen this before. People who claim connections to your past, who have sob stories designed to tug at your heartstrings. Naomi isn't like that, Christopher insisted. Then you won't mind if I do some due diligence, Richard said. Just basic background stuff. Verify her story, make sure everything checks out. If she's genuine, the investigation won't find anything concerning, and you can proceed with confidence. But if there are red flags? Fine, Christopher said, mostly to end the conversation. Do your investigation. But Richard, you're wrong about her. I know you are. I hope so, Richard said sincerely. I really do. But I'd rather be cautious now than watch you get hurt later. Richard hired a private investigation firm that specialized in background checks for high-profile clients. He asked them to dig deep into Naomi Bennett's history, where she'd worked, where she'd lived, her financial situation, her social media presence, everything. The investigators did their job thoroughly. They found records of Naomi Jackson at St. Helena's Orphanage from 1988 to 2000, confirming that part of her story. They found her marriage license and divorce papers, showing she'd been married to Jason Bennett from 2007 to 2009. They found records of her various jobs, her enrollment in community college, her student loans. But they also found something else. Something that made Richard's suspicions seem validated. In the months before Naomi applied for the housekeeping position at Christopher's mansion, She'd done extensive internet searches about him. The investigators found search history from the library computers she'd used. Christopher Hayes' net worth. Christopher Hayes' house. Christopher Hayes' childhood. St. Helena's Orphanage adoption records. She'd known exactly who he was. She'd researched him. And then she'd applied for a job in his home. The investigators also found that Naomi had applied for several other positions before getting the housekeeping job. All of them were at places connected to Christopher. His downtown office building. His favorite restaurant. A non-profit he funded. It looked like she'd been systematically trying to get close to him. When Richard saw the report, his heart sank. He'd hoped to be wrong. But the evidence seemed clear. Naomi had targeted Christopher, researched him, and positioned herself in his life. The orphanage connection was real, but her recent actions suggested calculation rather than coincidence. Richard knew he had to tell Christopher. It was his duty as a friend and business partner. But he also knew Christopher was falling in love with Naomi, maybe already loved her. This was going to break his heart. He called Christopher and asked him to come to his office. When Christopher arrived, Richard handed him the investigation report without preamble. "Read it," Richard said. "All of it. And then we'll talk." Christopher read the report in silence, his expression growing darker with each page. When he finished, he set it down carefully on Richard's desk. "She researched me," Christopher said quietly. "Extensively," Richard confirmed. "She knew who you were before she applied for the job. She tried to get hired at multiple places connected to you. Chris, this wasn't coincidence. This was a plan." "To do what?" Christopher asked. "To clean my floors. To work as a maid for 6 months without revealing her identity. That's a terrible plan to exploit someone." "Until she got caught," Richard said. "Or until she manufactured a situation where you'd discover the truth. Think about it. The photograph accidentally falling out of the frame. Her humming that specific song at the exact moment you'd overhear. It could all be manipulation." Christopher stood up abruptly. "I need to talk to her." "Chris, be careful," Richard said. "Don't let your feelings cloud your judgment." "My feelings are exactly why I need to talk to her," Christopher said. "I need to hear her side of this. I need to look her in the eye and ask her directly." He left Richard's office and drove straight to the university. Naomi's last class ended at 4, and she usually studied in the library for an hour before heading home. Christopher found her there, sitting at a table with her textbooks spread around her, completely absorbed in her work. She looked up when he approached, and her face lit up with a smile that made his chest ache. "Chris, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?" "We need to talk," Christopher said. "Can you take a break?" Something in his tone made her smile fade. "Of course. Let me pack up." They walked outside to a quiet spot on the campus lawn, away from other students. Christopher sat down on a bench, and Naomi sat beside him, concern written all over her face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You're scaring me." "I need you to be completely honest with me," Christopher said. "No matter what. Can you do that?" "I've always been honest with you," Naomi said. "Have you?" Christopher pulled out his phone and showed her the investigation report. "Did you research me before applying for the housekeeping job?" Naomi's face went pale. She looked at the phone, then at Christopher, then down at her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Did you apply for other jobs connected to me?" "Yes." "Did you plan all of this? Getting close to me, revealing your identity, making me fall for you?" "No." Naomi looked up, tears in her eyes. "Chris, no. It wasn't like that. I swear it wasn't like that." "Then tell me what it was like," Christopher said. His voice was hard, but his eyes betrayed his hurt. "Explain it to me, Naomi. Because right now, it looks like you targeted me." Naomi took a shaky breath, trying to gather her thoughts through the panic rising in her chest. Christopher was looking at her with suspicion and hurt, and she couldn't bear it. But she owed him the complete truth, no matter how bad it looked. "When Tamara died," she began slowly, "I was completely lost. I had no family left, I was drowning in her medical debt, and I was working 3 jobs just to survive. I was exhausted and hopeless and alone. Then one night, I was working at the diner, and the TV was on. And I saw you. She paused, remembering that moment. There you were, this successful, incredible person, talking about foster care reform. And I recognized you immediately, even though I hadn't seen you in 25 years. My little Chris. The boy I'd protected and cared for. You'd grown up and become everything we'd dreamed about in those dark nights at St. Helena's. So you decided to approach me? Christopher asked. No, Naomi said firmly. I decided to find out if you were okay. That's all. I went home and I looked you up online. I read everything I could find about you. Your companies, your charities, your life. I wanted to know that the scared little boy I'd loved had turned out all right. But you didn't stop there, Christopher said. No, I didn't, Naomi admitted. Because the more I read, the more I remembered. How you used to dream about having a house with a yard. How you wanted to help other kids like us. How you promised you'd come back for me. And I realized you'd done all of it. You'd kept every promise except the last one. Tears were flowing freely now, but she didn't wipe them away. I knew you hadn't come back for me because you'd forgotten, or maybe because you'd moved on with your new family. And that was okay. That was fine. You were 8 when you left. I never expected you to remember me forever. But I still wanted to see you once. Just once, to know for sure that you were happy. So you applied for the housekeeping job, Christopher said. I saw the posting online, Naomi said. And I thought, maybe this is a sign. Maybe I could work there for a little while, see you from a distance, confirm you were okay, and then quit and move on with my life. I never planned to tell you who I was. But you applied for other jobs connected to me first, Christopher pointed out. Yes, Naomi said. Because I was desperate for any way to see you. The office building turned me down. The restaurant never called back. The non-profit wasn't hiring. The housekeeping position was my last attempt. And when I got the job, I told myself I'd work there for a few months, save some money to put toward my debt, and then leave. What changed? Christopher asked. You, Naomi said simply. Every day I worked in your house, I saw more of the boy I'd known. The way you thanked the staff. The way you remembered everyone's names. The way you still had nightmares sometimes, I could tell from your bedroom the mornings after. You were kind and generous and good, and it hurt so much to be that close to you without you knowing who I was. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. But I couldn't tell you. Because I was the maid, and you were this incredibly successful person, and it would have seemed like I was looking for a handout. It would have seemed exactly like what your business partner thinks it is. So I kept quiet, and I did my job, and I tried to be satisfied with just knowing you were okay. Then the photograph fell, Christopher said. Then the photograph fell, Naomi repeated. And I couldn't hide my reaction. And you started asking questions. And I didn't plan any of that, Chris. I didn't orchestrate it or manipulate it. It just happened. The song, Christopher said. The lullaby at the gala. Did you hum it on purpose? No, Naomi said immediately. I was tired and overwhelmed, and it just came out. It's a song I've hummed 1,000 times in my life when I needed comfort. I had no idea you'd overhear, or that you'd remember it. Christopher was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Naomi waited, her heart pounding, terrified of what he might say. I believe you, he finally said. You do? Naomi asked, hope and disbelief mixing in her voice. I do, Christopher confirmed. Because I know you, know me. I knew you when we were kids, and I've gotten to know you again over these past months. You're not capable of that kind of long-term deception. You're too honest, sometimes painfully so. But the investigation, Naomi started, shows that you researched me and tried to get close to me, which you've just explained, Christopher said. It doesn't show malicious intent or a plan to exploit me. Richard sees it that way because he's protective and suspicious. But I see it differently. I see a woman who was desperate and hurting and wanted one glimpse of someone who'd once mattered to her. Naomi let out a sob of relief. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you the truth from the beginning. I should have just reached out directly instead of applying for the job. Maybe, Christopher agreed. But I understand why you didn't. And honestly, if you had reached out directly, I might not have believed you. I might have thought you were a scam. Working alongside you, even without knowing who you were, let me see the person you'd become. It let us rebuild our connection naturally. He took her hand, squeezing it gently. Richard is going to keep being suspicious, Christopher said. He's going to watch our relationship and look for any signs that he was right about you. I can't blame him for protecting you, Naomi said. You're lucky to have a friend who cares that much. I am, Christopher agreed. But I need you to know that I trust you, Naomi. Completely. What we have is real, not manufactured. And I'm not going to let anyone, not even my best friend, convince me otherwise without proof. What if he finds something else? Naomi asked. Some other piece of my past that looks bad. Then we'll deal with it together, Christopher said. That's what people do when they care about each other. They trust each other and they face challenges as a team. Naomi leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. I don't deserve you. You deserve everything good in the world, Christopher said. And I'm going to spend a very long time making sure you get it. They sat there for a while, just holding each other. The investigation had been scary, but it had also forced them to have complete honesty. There were no more secrets between them, no more hidden history. Everything was out in the open now. When they finally stood to leave, Christopher kept his arm around Naomi's shoulders. Come on, he said. Let's go face Richard together. We'll show him the investigation didn't find any real wrongdoing. We'll be transparent about everything. And if he still has doubts, he'll just have to live with them until you prove him wrong. How do I do that? Naomi asked. By being exactly who you are, Christopher said. Kind, honest, and amazing. The rest will take care of itself. They drove to Richard's office together. Richard looked surprised to see Naomi with Christopher, but he invited them both in. I know what the investigation found, Naomi said before Richard could speak. Christopher showed me. And I want to explain everything to you directly, so there's no confusion. She told Richard the same story she'd told Christopher, holding nothing back. She explained her desperation, her grief over Tamara, her need to see Christopher one last time. She admitted her mistakes and her poor decisions. When she finished, Richard was quiet for a moment. I believe you're being honest now, he said carefully. But I'm still concerned about the power dynamic in your relationship. Christopher has given you money, housing, education. You're in a position where leaving him would mean losing all of that. That's not a healthy foundation for a romantic relationship. You're right, Naomi said, surprising both men. Which is why I'm going to make some changes. Christopher, I want to pay rent on the guest house. Market rate. And I want to take out student loans for next semester instead of having you pay tuition. I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet. Naomi, that's not necessary, Christopher started. It is for me, Naomi interrupted gently. I appreciate everything you've done, more than you'll ever know. But Mr. Turner is right about the power dynamic. I need to be able to support myself. I need to know that I'm with you because I want to be, not because I need to be. Richard looked at her with new respect. That's very mature of you. I'm 35 years old, Naomi said with a slight smile. Maturity should come with age, even if it doesn't always. We'll work out the financial details later, Christopher said. But if this makes you feel more comfortable, I'm willing to adjust things. It does, Naomi confirmed. And Mr. Turner, I understand why you're protective of Christopher. I'd be suspicious too, in your position. I can't promise I'll never make mistakes, but I can promise that my feelings for him are genuine. I'm not after his money. I'm just trying to build a life with someone I've cared about since I was 10 years old. Richard nodded slowly. Then I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But I'll be watching. Not to catch you in a mistake, but to make sure you're both happy. Fair enough. Fair enough, Naomi agreed. They left Richard's office hand in hand, the crisis averted but not entirely resolved. Trust would take time to build, Naomi knew. But she was willing to put in that time. She was willing to do whatever it took to prove herself. Because Christopher was worth it. Their relationship was worth it. And for the first time in her life, Naomi felt like she was building something solid, something real, something that could last. 6 months later, Naomi stood in front of the mirror in her guest house, adjusting the simple white dress she'd chosen for today. It wasn't a traditional wedding dress. It was knee-length, lace overlaid, elegant but not fussy. Exactly right for the ceremony they'd planned. "You look beautiful," said Jennifer, Naomi's classmate and friend from university. She'd offered to help Naomi get ready, acting as the maid of honor. "Christopher is going to cry when he sees you." "He'd better not," Naomi said with a laugh. "He'll make me cry, and then we'll both be a mess." "Too late for me," said a voice from the doorway. Naomi turned to see Christopher standing there in a dark grey suit, his eyes already shining with unshed tears. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the ceremony," Jennifer protested. "We're not really following tradition," Christopher said, his eyes never leaving Naomi. "Can I have a moment alone with her?" Jennifer nodded and slipped out of the room, closing the door behind her. Christopher crossed to Naomi and took both her hands in his. "I know I'm supposed to wait until the ceremony to do this," he said. "But I needed to tell you something first." "What?" Naomi asked, her heart full. 25 years ago, I promised you I'd come back," Christopher said. "I promised we'd be a family. And I broke that promise, not intentionally, but I still broke it. Today, I'm making you a new promise. I promise to love you for the rest of my life. I promise to be your partner, your friend, your home. I promise that you'll never be alone again." "Chris," Naomi whispered, tears streaming down her face despite her best efforts. "I'm not finished," Christopher said, smiling through his own tears. "I promise to remember where we came from and to never forget the scared kids we were. I promise to use what we have to help other kids like us. And I promise that every single day, I'll work to deserve the gift of your love." "You already deserve it," Naomi said. "You've always deserved it. And I make you the same promises. I promise to love you, to support you, to be honest with you even when it's hard. I promise to be your family in every way that matters. And I promise to never let you forget that you're the bravest, kindest, most wonderful person I've ever known." They kissed then, breaking the pre-ceremony rule completely, not caring about tradition or superstition. They'd found each other against impossible odds. They'd lost each other and found their way back. A kiss before the ceremony seemed like the least of their rebellions. The ceremony itself was small and perfect. They'd chosen to hold it at St. Helena's Orphanage, or what used to be St. Helena's. Christopher had purchased the building 6 months ago and renovated it completely. It was now called Helena's Home, a state-of-the-art residential facility for foster children, with therapy rooms, art studios, a library, and comfortable bedrooms that looked nothing like the cold dorms they'd grown up in. 30 children currently lived at Helena's Home, and they were all invited to the wedding. They sat in the front rows of the small chapel that had been added during renovations, watching with curious eyes as the adults got married. Richard stood as Christopher's best man, having finally accepted Naomi completely after watching her insist on paying her own way and seeing how happy she made his best friend. Naomi's friend Jennifer stood beside her. The ceremony was conducted by a chaplain who worked with foster children, someone who understood what this place meant to both Christopher and Naomi. When it came time for the vows, Naomi and Christopher recited the promises they'd already made to each other in the guest house, their voices strong and sure. And when the chaplain finally said, "You may kiss your bride," Christopher took Naomi's face in his hands and kissed her with all the love and gratitude and joy he felt. The children cheered, and several of the adults cried, and everything was exactly as it should be. At the reception in Helena's Home's large community room, Christopher gave a speech. "Most of you know that Naomi and I met here, in this building, when it was St. Helena's Orphanage," he said. "I was a scared 8-year-old who'd lost everything. Naomi was 10, and she'd already been here for 7 years. She had every reason to be hard and closed off, but instead, she chose kindness. She chose to protect me, teach me, care for me. She saved my life in ways she'll never fully understand." He looked at Naomi, who was wiping her eyes. "We were separated for 25 years, Christopher continued. I looked for her, but I couldn't find her. And then, through what some might call coincidence but I call fate, she walked back into my life. We've had to navigate complicated feelings, deal with suspicions, figure out who we are both together and apart. But through it all, one thing has remained constant. We are family. We've always been family. And now, we get to make that official. He raised his glass. To Naomi, my wife, my best friend, my home. To the children here at Helena's home who are at the beginning of their journeys. And to the power of love to survive even the darkest times. May we all find our way home, no matter how long it takes. Everyone raised their glasses and drank to the toast. Later, as the party was winding down, Naomi and Christopher walked through Helena's home together, looking at all the changes. The old dormitory where they'd slept was now divided into smaller bedrooms, each decorated with bright colors and personal touches. The cafeteria where they'd shared meals was now a warm dining room with round tables and comfortable chairs. The courtyard where they'd said goodbye was now a garden with flowers and benches and play equipment. We really did it, Naomi said softly. We turned this place into something beautiful. You turned it into something beautiful the first time around, Christopher said. I just helped with the renovations. They walked to the fence where they'd said goodbye all those years ago. It was still there, now more decorative than functional, covered in climbing roses. I stood right here, Christopher said, touching the fence. I held your hands through the links and promised I'd come back. And you did, Naomi said. It took 25 years, but you kept your promise. I'll keep all my promises to you, Christopher said. The one I made today and every one I make in the future. I'll never leave you again, Naomi. Not ever. And I'll never let you go, Naomi replied. We're stuck with each other now. Best kind of stuck there is, Christopher said, pulling her close. As the sun set over Helena's home, Naomi thought about the journey that had brought them here. The loneliness of the orphanage. The pain of separation. The years of struggling and surviving. The impossible coincidence of finding each other again. The challenges they'd overcome together. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been simple. But it had been worth it. She'd started with nothing. A scared little girl with no family and no hope. And now, she had everything. A husband who loved her. A purpose that fulfilled her. A home that was truly hers. And most importantly, the family she'd always dreamed of. Christopher kissed the top of her head. What are you thinking about? How lucky we are, Naomi said. How many things had to go exactly right for us to end up here? Not luck, Christopher said. Love. Love brought us together the first time, love kept us in each other's hearts even when we were apart, and love brought us back together. That's not luck. That's destiny. Destiny sounds good, Naomi agreed. They stayed there until the stars came out, two people who'd started with nothing and built everything together. The scared children they'd been would never have believed this ending was possible. But here they were, living proof that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures. Naomi Bennett Hayes finally had what she'd always wanted. She had a home. She had love. She had family. And standing in the garden of the orphanage where it all began, with her husband's arms around her and their future stretching out before them like an endless possibility, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd never be alone again. The end.